The clink of silverware against fine china, usually accompanying sounds signifying family and warmth, tonight scraped against the raw edges of my nerves like a knife sharpening itself on bone. The dining room, usually a haven of soft light and shared laughter, felt cavernous, oppressive, the air thick with unspoken accusations and cloying scent of roasted meat and herbs that suddenly turned my stomach. Candles flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the faces around the table. Faces I thought I knew but now seemed like masks hiding grotesque secrets. My wife sat to my right, her profile serene, beautiful as always, radiating a calm that felt utterly alien to the storm raging inside me. She lifted her wine glass, the deep red liquid catching the light like spilled blood, and took a small, deliberate sip. Her movements were precise, controlled, a stark contrast to the tremor I fought to suppress in my own hand gripping the fork. Across the table, her father slowly lowered his own glass. He hadn't said much during the meal, observing with an unnerving stillness that now felt predatory. His eyes, usually sharp and assessing in a businesslike way, held a new quality tonight, a knowing glint, a spark of cruel amusement. He chewed slowly, deliberately, his gaze fixed not on his plate, but on me. It was a look that bypassed pleasantries, bypassed the facade of the family dinner, and drilled directly into a festering wound in my chest, the one I'd been desperately trying to ignore, to rationalize away for weeks. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the muffled sounds from the kitchen and the too loud beating of my own heart against my ribs. It was a silence heavy with implication, a silence screaming with everything left unsaid. Then it happened. He finished chewing, dabbed his lips with a napkin with an exaggerated care that felt like a performance, and leaned back slightly in his chair. His eyes never left mine. And then the corners of his mouth lifted, not into a smile, not even a smirk of shared amusement. No, this was something else entirely. It was a slow, deliberate curling of the lips, devoid of warmth, filled instead with a chilling blend of contempt and a sickening kind of satisfaction. It was a look of a cat that has finally cornered the mouse it's been toying with. It was a look of a man holding all the cards, watching his opponent squirm, knowing the final, crushing blow is his to deliver. And then, with that expression carved onto his face like a grotesque statue, he spoke. His voice, usually a dry baritone, was low, almost conversational, yet it sliced through the fragile silence like shards of ice. "How does it feel?" he murmured, the words dripping with a venomous sweetness. "Being used?" Time didn't stop. It shattered. The question hung in the air, not a question seeking an answer, but a statement, a confirmation, a detonation. The carefully constructed dam I built inside my mind, brick by fragile brick of denial, shattered instantly under its weight. The fork slipped from my numb fingers, clattering against the plate with a sound that seemed obscenely loud in the sudden, absolute stillness. My wife froze mid-motion, her own fork poised above her plate, her knuckles white where she gripped it. Her serene mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a flash of pure, unadulterated panic before she quickly schooled her features back into blankness, refusing to look at me, refusing to look at him. She stared fixedly at a point somewhere beyond my shoulder, her breath catching audibly. The words echoed in the hollow space where my thoughts used to be, being used. They weren't just words. They were keys turning in locks I hadn't even known existed, doors swinging open on the landscapes of betrayal I'd been too blind, too trusting to see. The feeling wasn't new. It had been a creeping vine wrapping around my heart for weeks, a cold dread I dismissed as stress, as paranoia, as the inevitable friction of a long marriage. The late nights at the office that stretched into unexplained absences. The sudden, intense focus on her phone, held at an angle away from me, a shield against my gaze. The subtle shift in her perfume, a scent I didn't recognize, clinging to her skin even after showers. The new, expensive lingerie appearing in her drawer, delicate lace and silk whispering secrets I hadn't been privy to. The emotional distance, the conversations that skimmed the surface like stones on water, never diving deep. The way she flinched almost imperceptibly if I touched her unexpectedly, a recoil that spoke volumes louder than any words of affection she might murmur later. I'd cataloged them all, these tiny, insidious details, storing them away in a dark corner of my mind labeled worry later. I'd explain them away. The late nights were a demanding new project. The phone secrecy was just her being private. The perfume a gift from a friend. The lingerie a treat for herself. The distance was my fault for being preoccupied. The flinching was stress. I'd build a fortress of rationalizations, brick by flimsy brick. Because the alternative, the truth, was unthinkable. It was a bedrock of my life cracking beneath my feet. She was my wife, my partner, the mother of my children, thankfully away at college, spared this carnage. We had history, shared dreams, a home built together. The idea that she could look me in the eye, share my bed, plan a future, while weaving a separate, hidden tapestry with someone else, it defied comprehension. It violated every unspoken covenant between us. But now here it was, laid bare by our own father's smirk and his poisoned words. He knew. That was the most devastating blow, perhaps even more than the confirmation of the act itself. How long had he known? Had she confided in him? Laughed about it over coffee? Shared the sordid details of her deception while he nodded? Perhaps even offered advice? Was he complicit? Or was he merely an observer, biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to twist a knife? His smirk suggested the latter. It was the smirk of a man who watched the play unfold, knew the final act, and relished the dramatic reveal. He hadn't warned me. He hadn't intervened. He'd let me blunder on, loving, trusting, building sandcastles while the tide of betrayal was already rolling in. The silence in the room was a physical thing now, pressing down on me, suffocating. My wife remained a statue, frozen in her chair, radiating a terrified rigidity. Her father leaned back further, his smirk deepening, his eyes never leaving mine, drinking in my reaction with an almost obscene pleasure. He delivered his line, the villain in this domestic tragedy, and now he was enjoying the show. The carefully prepared food on my plate congealed into something repulsive. The expensive wine tasted like vinegar. The candlelight, meant to be warm and inviting, felt harsh, exposing, illuminating the wreckage of my life in stark, unforgiving relief. How does it feel being used? It felt like falling. A long, sickening plummet through empty space, with no bottom in sight. It felt like every memory, every shared laugh, every whispered promise, every touch, every sacrifice, every moment of vulnerability offered and accepted, all of it instantly reclassified, not as genuine affection or partnership, but as currency, as leverage, as a tool in her hands to maintain the facade while she pursued someone else. I was the useful idiot, the reliable provider, the stable background noise against which her secret, thrilling melody played. My trust was the stage upon which her deception performed. My love was the fuel that powered the engine of her double life. I was the dupe, the mark, the punchline to a joke everyone but me seemed to be in on. The physical sensations were overwhelming. A cold sweat breaking out on my brow despite the room's warmth, a metallic taste flooding my mouth, a crushing pressure on my chest, making each breath a struggle, a roaring in my ears that drowned out the mundane sounds of the house. My vision tunneled, focusing only on that smirk across the table, a grotesque rictus etched onto the face of a man I respected, welcomed into my home, called family. It was a mask of triumph, a silent declaration that he had seen the rot at the heart of my marriage long before I had, and he found my blindness, my gullibility, profoundly amusing. His daughter's betrayal was secondary. My humiliation was the main event, and her my wife, the woman I'd woken up beside for countless mornings, the woman whose tears I'd wiped, whose dreams I'd championed, whose body I knew as intimately as my own. Now she was a stranger, a beautiful, composed stranger sitting rigidly beside me, radiating fear and guilt but offering no explanation, no denial, no comfort. Her silence was a final confirmation, louder than any confession. She couldn't even look at me. She couldn't meet the eyes of the man whose entire reality she had just vaporized with her actions now laid bare by her father's cruel intervention. Was she ashamed? Or was she merely terrified of the consequences? Did she regret the affair, or just regret being caught in such a brutal, public way? Her frozen posture gave nothing away except abject panic. The urge to act was primal, to overturn the table, sending crystal and china crashing, to roar, to demand answers, to unleash the torrent of pain and rage that threatened to split me open, to grab her, shake her, force her to speak, to explain how she could do this, why she would do this, to confront him, that smug spectator, wipe the smirk off his face with my fist. But a deeper, colder instinct held me paralyzed, a profound exhaustion, the exhaustion of the fool who has finally seen the truth and find the energy for outrage has been bled dry by the long, slow process of being deceived. What good would answers do now? What explanation could possibly justify the systematic dismantling of trust, the casual cruelty of the double life? What words could rebuild the shattered glass of our marriage? None. There were no words. Only the hollow echo of his question, reverberating in the ruins. How does it feel being used? It felt like annihilation. It felt like the death of the person I was, the person who believed in her, in us, in the fundamental goodness of the bond we shared. That man was gone, erased by a smirk and 7 devastating words. What remained was a shell, filled with a howling void of betrayal, humiliation, and a grief so profound it felt like physical pain. The future, once a landscape of comfortable routines and shared goals, now yawned before me as a terrifying, desolate wasteland. Divorce, lawyers, dividing possessions, explaining to friends, to family, to our children, the pitying looks, the whispered judgments, the inevitable question, how did you not know? And beneath it all, the relentless, corrosive knowledge, I had been loved not for myself, but for what I provided, stability, security, a cover, while her heart, her passion, her true self had been given to another. I had been a utility, not a partner, a means to an end, used. The silence stretched on, thick and poisonous. He watched me, waiting, perhaps, for my reaction. Tears, rage, pleading. My wife remained motionless, trapped in her own private hell of exposure. I took a slow, deliberate breath, the air scraping my throat like sandpaper. I looked down at my hands, resting uselessly on the tablecloth, seeing not my own familiar skin, but the hand of a man who had been played for a fool. Then, with a calm that felt alien, detached, like watching someone else move my body, I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the wooden floor, a harsh, jarring sound in the silent room. I stood up. I didn't look at her. I didn't look at him. I looked straight ahead, through the flickering candle flames, towards the doorway leading out of this charnel house of a dining room. My legs felt leaden, but they held. There were no words left in me. Nothing to say to either of them. The only action possible was to leave, to walk away from the ruins of my marriage, from the architect of my pain sitting so serenely beside me, and from the gloating spectator who had delivered the coup de grace with such relish. To walk away, carrying the unbearable weight of the answer to his question. How does it feel? It feels like nothing will ever be whole again. I turned and walked out of the room, leaving the silence, the shattered dinner, the smirking father, and my utterly broken life behind me. Each step was an effort, each breath a conscious act, carrying me further into a terrifying, unknown darkness where the echo of those words would be my only companion. How does it feel being used?